this is just not rhetoric. We're absolutely dead serious. We're not. You cannot have a constitutional republic and allow what these deep staters have done to the country. The deep state, the administrative state, the fourth branch of government, never mentioned in the Constitution, is going to be taken apart brick by brick. And the people that did these evil deeds will be held accountable and prosecuted, criminal prosecutions. Cash, I know you're probably going to be head of the CIA, but do you believe that you can deliver the goods on this in a pretty short order the first couple of months so we can get rolling on prosecutions?
Yes, we got the bench for it, Bannon, and you know those guys. I'm not going to go out there and say their names right now so the radical left-wing media can terrorize them. But, excuse me, the one thing we learned in the Trump administration the first go-around is we got to put in all-America patriots top to bottom. And we got them for law enforcement. We got them for intel collection. We got them for offensive operations. We got them for DOD, CIA, everywhere. And the one thing we will do that they never will do is we will follow the facts and the law and go to courts of law and correct these justices and lawyers who have been prosecuting these cases based on politics and actually issuing them as lawfare. We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice. And Steve, this is why they hate us. This is why we're tyrannical. This is why we're dictators.
All right. I am Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, as always, by our super producer, Jake Appett, and our extremely talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. You just heard a friend of the show, Steve Bannon, talking with even closer friend of the show, Kash Patel.
New character alert.
Yes. New character in the GTA extended universe, but already a good friend of the show, announcing his plans to go after the media. I heard a couple times. He also used the phrase "the radical left media" in there, and in particular, he didn't name any names, but he was talking about going after the deep staters, which I can only assume is a reference to our guest coming up in about 10 minutes, deep state Kuba. Dr. Kuba, you've been put on notice. This is the Trump administration is coming for you. It is, in all seriousness, pretty striking, that, okay, a few months ago, this was late summer, Kuba and I wrote an article for Jacobin. I think we have the graphic of that, if I'm not mistaken. We co-wrote an article for Jacobin called "Trump Wants to Purge the Deep State so he can weaponize it." And at the time that we wrote that, it was relatively speculative. And now in the few weeks since the election, they just keep saying it nonstop. Right. This is just it's no longer an interesting claim, right? It's just kind of writing down what they're saying in podcast interviews.
Yeah, which I assume Kuba's going to weigh in on, but whenever I hear these guys talking like that, it sounds almost like really bringing to fruition more of the, I don't want to say civil war, but whatever actual tensions there are within the conservative faction, between the MAGA people and the people who kind of just want business as usual with the Trump figurehead. And it's very hard for me to imagine the Trump faction winning, but I mean, he's the president, so he has a lot of power. It's just more how all the people around him that don't want this to happen. I don't know. It's probably going to be a really wild battle that's going to go on, I assume, unless they're all just full of shit. But I don't know, that Cash guy, I feel like he really believes what he's saying. I don't know if that's true or not, but I feel like he seems sincere about it. But
yeah, I mean, look, I think
him further.
I think it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Sure.
That, of course, a lot of these guys are very profoundly full of shit about, all kinds of things. I mean, in fact, some of the things that I'd most like them to be serious about I think that the record would suggest that they're fairly full of shit about him. And I think that, certainly if you look at, the foreign policy record of the first Trump administration,
Sure.
or the labor record of the first Trump administration, there's a lot of grounds for pessimism about whether there is in fact a Trump faction, certainly one that, Donald Trump is a member of, that wants to do anything, unestablishment-ish about those subjects. But on the other hand, there's a fair amount of stuff that they're talking about that, would be way worse than anything that happened in the first Trump administration. That, yeah, sure. I mean, maybe, right? Like, I think certainly, as our actual friend Branko Marcetic pointed out in an article just before the election, a lot of what Trump has been saying for the last few months, amounts to a promise to do a third Red Scare, right? Deport pro-Hamas radicals and make campuses safe and patriotic again, is the sentence from the GOP platform that's been, emblazoned in my head since then. He's also talked many times about doing some sort of military intervention in Mexico, and I've got to say, as a on again off again resident of Mexico who also teaches college classes and who I'm pretty sure Trump would consider to be pro-Hamas, even though of course I'm not in any literal sense. All of that stuff is pretty worrying. I mean, as far as things like this, right? That like, oh, we're gonna really purge the deep state. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's important to understand what they're actually saying when they say that, right? That they're not saying like, we're going to abolish the CIA. They have no interest in doing that. They're not pretending to have any interest in doing that. I mean, some of the rhetoric would superficially suggest it, right? We're going to take a hammer to the deep state, all this stuff. But
I did find that other clip of Kash Patel where he actually did say he wants to close down the FBI, fire everybody, and then turn the J. Edgar Hoover building into a monument to the deep state.
Okay, I think I watched the same clip and I heard it a little bit differently, because I remember the part about turning the building into a monument to the deep state. But I think if you really listen to that closely, he doesn't actually talk about firing anybody, really. Like he says, well, why do we have these 7,000 or 8,000 or whatever it is FBI employees in Washington, D.C.? They should be out there in the heart of the country doing their jobs. And so it seems like, he doesn't actually even necessarily want a smaller FBI. He just wants it to be, it's like the, if you ever watched, you remember the TV show Cops back in the day, there was, there's a very common thing that, whenever anybody was getting arrested, they'd be like, why ain't you all out, chasing drug dealers? Right? Like it's more that kind of energy, right? That they should be going after the right targets, which, I guess you could argue that if we're, really just talking about, rapists and murderers and et cetera, then that's all to the good. But I think if you listen to a lot of this rhetoric, if you listen to what Kash Patel said in the clip that we just watched, right? He said, the media, right, is part of who he wants to prosecute for what exactly he didn't say.
He said Biden rigged multiple elections, so
which is
I
confusing.
guess,
so he rigged this one to lose.
He rigged the first, yeah. Or maybe he was just in charge of rigging even before he took office. He just
he rigged the Obama elections.
Yeah.
I was wondering about that. Is there has new lore dropped? Like, do they now think like the 2008 and 2012 elections were stolen?
Probably.
Because I mean, Mitt Romney was just so popular.
I think even they wouldn't try to argue that Mitt Romney won. I was gonna say too, Ben, because this is like slightly maybe different than what you'll be talking about with Kuba, but because there was also that bill passed. I mean, I have it in front of me. U.S. House passes bill to punish nonprofits deemed to support terrorism. Right? I don't know what is that completely through at this point? I don't remember what stage, because this is very recent.
I think it's at least past the House.
Yeah, past the House, and I don't know if it's like gone through the
I don't
Senate,
know if it got through the Senate or it has to go through the conference stuff or whatever. But I mean, it's
pretty wild,
like
though.
Something that's going to happen. It's also, by the way, I mean, it's funny because I mean, I'm actually working on an article for Damage, or we're just going through the edits now, where I say like, you know, I think that the Hitler comparisons about Trump are actually really unhelpful. I think that if you're, you know, I think, you know, hysteria serves no one. It certainly doesn't serve as long-term a project as patiently rebuilding the workers' movement and coalescing the kind of left that can contest for power in one of the most deeply anti-socialist countries in the world, right? And you know, I think that it's I think that's more useful to think about sort of authoritarian and repressive things that have happened in American history, right? You know, Woodrow Wilson, right, did a lot of the things that Trump is threatening to do. You know, Eisenhower did a lot of the things that Trump is threatening to do. Right?
That's comforting. That's comforting to know it's like homegrown and it's not like Nazi shit. You know,
locally sourced artisanal authoritarianism.
Yes.
That's a good point.
I mean, that's what really matters, right? That you have to buy American, right? Like that we're not getting an import. No, but I mean, look, I mean, I think terrible things happen, and it is actually helpful to maintain some kind of sense of perspective about that, right? You know, if the world is constantly falling, right, falling apart, then for one thing, it just stops being convincing, you know, after a certain point. But right. So all that said, it's like, yeah, you know, I mean, despite saying that, I mean, I am fairly worried about a lot of what, you know, a lot of what Trump might do. That, you know, I mean, some of that Wilson and Eisenhower stuff was really, really bad, right? The Wilson sent troops to Mexico, started the first Red Scare. That, you know, often quoted garbage about, you know, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater, which, you know, okay, fair enough. Don't literally shout fire in a crowded theater unless it's on fire. But you know, the context was the Supreme Court, you know, upholding, you know, the Wilson era jailing of socialists passing out, you know, Yiddish language pamphlets opposing World War I and, you know, calling for draft resistance. You know, Eisenhower did use the military for a massive deportation operation, which since, you know, it was a different time, the actual official name of that was Operation Wetback. I'm not making that up. But yeah, so I think some really terrible things could happen. I don't think Hitler terrible, but I think there's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of room for things to be very, very bad, you know, without going full Hitler. And it is amazing that if you do literally believe that Trump is a fascist, which if you can remember as far back as like late October, lots of Democrats were saying that, right? That was a very common thing for Democrats and liberals to say. And if you did believe that, it's like, what the fuck are you doing? Voting for this thing to hand the incoming Trump administration power to shut down nonprofits that, you know, they deem to be pro-terrorist.
Yeah, I mean,
A lot of Democrats did.
It's so insane. And like, even like, if you're, you know, anti nonprofit and you just hate, you know, you think that none of these nonprofits are doing anything, which I think is probably, you know, definitely is definitely true. But, you know, I mean, Jewish Voice for Peace is a nonprofit, right? A lot of organizations that are pushing for.
Most nonprofits suck, but some of them are important, and the ones that are the ones that are most likely to be gone after.
And I think the ones that suck should be allowed to exist without the government interfering. You know what I mean? For anyone who's worried about government overreach, and also just like the word terrorism, kind of like similar to the Red Scare, right? Like how narrowly do you think that word is going to be defined once you have Trump or Trump's administration wielding it? Do you know what I mean? Like, terrorism, I think, is going to be the extremely broadly defined. And I don't know. I mean, it's you know, in terms of what Trump could do for me, you know, I'm the type of motherfucker that might apply to a few nonprofits here or there to work, you know. So, but I feel like, you know, if you're working somewhere and then, you know, there's literally just like a state apparatus of oppression that closes down your job site, then, you know, what can you do? You just don't live in a great country at that point, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I can bake that into my future plans, but it is scary to think. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, I mean, it should be. And yes, also shitty nonprofits should indeed generally be allowed to exist.
Maybe we could think of one, but nothing comes to mind. But one that they could ceremonially shut down, kind of like the opposite of pardoning a turkey, right? They could unpardon one nonprofit that just sucks so bad. But no, but there's a lot of good nonprofits there too. You know,
I mean, look, there's certainly lots of nonprofits, you know, you could think of in California that I think should stop getting like government contracts to do nothing, right? But I don't I don't think the government should come in and shut them down, right? It's like I don't know if you guys tracked this at all, but there's been the sort of latest in right-wing Twitter just being like just being an exercise in collective mental illness. In the last couple of days, a really shocking number of these people have been losing their minds about this like British graduate student who posted this photo of like herself holding her like PhD, you know, I don't think they call it dissertation. I think it's a PhD thesis, you know, at Cambridge. And, you know, and just sort of beaming about being finished with her defense and said, you know, PhD done, you know, and there were all these people who were mad because the title of the dissertation sounded like bullshit. And, you know, and it sounded like lib shit to them. And it's like, okay, maybe, but like, you know, is your instinctive reaction to this like perfectly pleasant seeming young woman who's like proud of her professional accomplishment in a field you find a little silly? If your instinctive reaction to that is like fury, it's, you know, politics aside, I think you have bigger problems.
Yeah, fair enough. By the way, it's been pointed out that you have a different Twitter handle under your name than usual. But I will say that if you're angry at Ben Burgis, please direct all of your furious tweets to at @jmiles. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, he'll get to every complaint. Don't worry about it.
Exactly. Yes.
Literally our complaint department.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been having severe internet issues at my apartment for the last couple of days, which is also why we're starting late today. And my neighbor was nice enough to let me come over and use his setup to do the show from tonight. So I don't really know why we're throwing him under the bus with the Twitter complaints, but let's do it anyway. All right. Well, we are still waiting for Dr. Kuba, but we have Mean Gene, so we might as well bring him on. Oh, there's Kuba too. All right. See you guys.
Greetings.
Crazy stuff going on in Syria, eh?
All a good time. Good times in Syria.
Yeah.
Or bad times, depending on who you are.
Well,
you mean a Syrian?
Yeah, pretty much. It's a bad time for to be Syrian.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because you know I think that you know the policy on whether Islamist rebels who persecute religious minorities and such are good or bad seems to be a little confusing, at least to me. That the you know what the party line is on that in mainstream discourse, but I'm sure we can get into all of that. Yeah, basically, I thought that this would be a good time to bring the guys on to do a bit of a foreign policy roundup, because my general impression is that everything is on fire right now. We've got we've got rebels, terrorists, whatever word you want to use, taking Aleppo. We've got U.S. missiles striking deep into Russia. We've got the atrocities in Gaza getting bad enough that there was recently a clip that was going around of a former Likud defense minister accusing the Netanyahu government of engaging in ethnic cleansing, using that phrase. So yeah, things seem terrifyingly interesting, and thought bring you guys on to talk over it all. But maybe just to start with, I should say that Djene and I wrote an article for Jacobin a few weeks ago, and we haven't talked about it on the show yet. So let's, Jake, if we have that graphic, that's the calling a football riot. Sorry, we used the correct approved terminology. Calling a football riot a pogrom insults historical memory, right? Since this is this was all the rage. If depending on what news sources you were getting your information from, you might have believed a few weeks ago that there was a pogrom in the streets of Amsterdam, which would be really alarming. But Djene, what actually did happen there?
Well, what happened was a football riot. Yeah. And it was a football riot, and there were racial undertones to it. There were obviously some anti-Israeli and perhaps even anti-Semitic slogans shouted. There were groups of people who were out looking for a fight, but that's not atypical of football riots. Anyone who has any knowledge of the history of football-related violence will be aware that football fans have a reputation for, especially certain football teams in Europe. I'm thinking of Millwall in the United Kingdom. Have associations with particular far-right groups or far-right ideologies, etc., etc. And often, football riots will drag in people who are not involved in the football, people looking for a fight. But one of the key arguments I think that people were making that this was a pogrom was because there were some WhatsApp messages found that, said that people were looking for a fight and they were going for a Jew hunt, etc., which
also
doesn't make it
in on the culture of sort of football fandom in Europe. Yeah. These are not necessarily the most disciplined, woke members of society in terms of the language and discourse they use. The nicknames for the two Polish soccer teams in Krakow were the Jews and the Dogs, right? Yeah. And that's just what people called them. If that's the culture around fandom, then it's going to be the vocabulary is going to be rough.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that it was the Tel Aviv, Maccabi team that was visiting, and there were Tel Aviv soccer hooligans who had, kind of done the initial round of violence. That there were some cab like Arab cab drivers that they'd attacked, Palestinian flags that had been ripped down and burned.
Standard stuff.
Your standard football, and
which is none of this is actually that atypical. Like the idea that there's. I mean, I would actually be genuinely shocked if there had ever been like a major football riot in Europe where like nobody had said anything racist.
I've seen football riots in England where people with southern accents at the train station were getting attacked. Forget about interethnic conflict. Anyone who didn't come from Hull City during a Hull City game was liable to get punched at the station. So, I mean, I think the people who claim it's a pogrom point to this fact that apparently even before the Israeli fans had arrived in the Netherlands, that there'd been plans to have some violence. But, violence is usually planned. And this is completely separate from the fact that the Maccabi fans apparently went on the rampage. Went on a rampage, and then some local people, maybe some football fans, maybe some, members of the Turkish and Moroccan minorities, thought they would get in on the action, especially, as temperatures were heating up. The Israeli fans had behaved badly. So some of the locals, came out looking for a fight, looking for Israeli football fans to beat up. That there was racially motivated or ethnically motivated violence is beyond question, both on the Israeli side and on the people attacking the Israelis. But that doesn't make it a pogrom. Racist violence in and of itself doesn't make it a pogrom. And I refer to some of the literature in the piece on pogroms about like what pogroms were referred to, and the kind of pogroms that forced Jewish people to flee Russia, they occurred at a particular moment when, at a very interesting moment where, on one hand, Jewish people are legally and socially disadvantaged inside Tsarist Russia, at the same time as you're having changes to the social order, a shift away from the old kind of ghettoization to a certain degree of the Jewish community. So you have this kind of paradoxical situation where there is a kind of there's transformations and changes taking place, and that those transformations, Jewish people become the victims of those transformations and changes as members of the majority group seek to kind of reassert social superiority. And you see very similar parallels to the way Christians were treated in the Ottoman
the Tulsa
Empire.
Massacre in the U.S., things like
or
that.
Chinese in Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia. Those are pogroms where you have a minority that is legally and socially disadvantaged and are subject to violence from the majority. And very often this violence is not initiated by the state. A lot of the pogrom research, the older literature on pogrom,
and it's also a segment of the majority.
A segment
right?
Of the majority.
Yeah.
The older literature on pogroms placed this as pogroms as being a kind of conspiracy of the Russian secret police with the state actors. But a scholarship on this discovered actually the state wasn't initiating these violence. Rather, they were often tolerating it, or maybe perhaps
offering amnesties or bounties, even, right?
But states would allow populations to, engage in violence against minorities as a way of kind of letting off steam and to kind of reassert traditional.
They could even be conceived of as a reward in some situations, or compensation.
But ultimately, the key point is, Jewish people in modern day Europe aren't living in ghettos. They aren't legally or politically disadvantaged. The state isn't offering sort of tacit support, or perhaps more accurately, turning a blind eye to anti-Jewish violence. This was definitely a kind of race.
Also, I would point out that the goal in the classic pogroms is partly to drive out the undesired population. It's not necessarily annihilationist, but there's an encouragement towards emigration, and it's not coincidental that in the classical period of sort of 19th and 20th century pogroms, you also have large movements of that minority people, whether it's Greeks out of Anatolia or Jews out of Eastern Europe, or etc. But
I think that what people are evoking when they use that word pogrom, which again, as you guys point out, applies to all these other situations besides, Jews in Eastern Europe, but we're using the Russian word for that, that was the target in that case. But it's an instance of a much larger pattern you have in those other, European examples, or you have in stuff like the Tulsa Massacre in the United States, where you have a subordinated group that, part of their subordination and, the way it's even more likely maybe to be, to be enforced during periods of social change when, the old rules are, coming a little bit into question, is that, that they're vulnerable to violence from members of the minority population, with the state kind of tending to, at best, turn a blind eye to it, right? I mean, that's a pogrom, right? Like I'm not historically the biggest fan of speaking as a sentences, right? But like, that's why I'm here, right? In North America. Like,
Kuba's ancestors, Pogrom, your
exactly,
ancestors.
right? That's good. The Kuba
Well, my
family.
ancestors abducted the female ancestors of Kuba.
Yeah, it's the circle of life.
It's the circle of life, yeah.
But yeah, it's like, that's a pogrom, right? Like, this is a football riot. That, like,
and we also have historical examples, right? It's also a classical case of a football riot, where the violence may have just this political patina around good old-fashioned soccer hooliganism, right? Like, if it weren't Palestinian liberation and the Maccabees, then maybe it would have been, I don't know, anti-Turkish sentiment against a German team, right? The part of the moment that we're in is just a large, free-floating, tremendous free-floating mass of anger that political movements try to tap into, but also can't control, whether as states or as like a MAGA type phenomenon, and that gets mobilized socially as well as politically.
Yeah,
and you see this, for example, in Scotland with the rivalry between Rangers and Celtic. The two Glasgow football teams. There was always a political underpinning between those particular groups, with Celtic being pro-Irish, pro-Republican, whereas Rangers was pro-Union. So there's been, so Rangers Celtic football violence was spurred in part by the troubles in Northern Ireland. This is a well-established fact. You go around the world, you'll find political teams often, football teams often have kind of political orientations. For example,
I mean, this is like two groups of football fans who are like acting out some kind of internationalistic, right? Like, rivalry between competing nationalisms, like having like a violent confrontation that oftentimes like ropes in other people who maybe are there to cheer for the same team, but like weren't themselves involved in the violence at all, right? End up being targeted. People say racist things. I mean, these are just all classic European football riot things, right? Like this is just extremely standard stuff, right? And again, I think it's a kind of I think it's a kind of hysteria that that serves well, I would say no one, but I mean it obviously serves the needs of the Israeli right to sort of traffic in this anachronistic portrayal of Europe as if Jews in the Netherlands in 2024 were in the position of Jews in
it's exactly like Kristallnacht, right? That was the other comparison that was brought up by apparently calendar coincidence. The soccer violence in Amsterdam coincided with the anniversary of Kristallnacht.
Yeah, and I mean Kristallnacht was a kind of super pogrom, right? Like it, I mean, very much organized by the state in that case, but like lots of grassroots popular participation. That was the point, right? That
you got to get everybody together, make it a real unity celebration, opportunity to bridge our differences.
Yeah, and I actually, my understanding is that there were a couple of people who were like grassroots participants who were prosecuted afterwards for raping Jewish women during Kristallnacht, and the charge was that they were violating the sexual purity laws, since that forbade sex between Jews and Aryans. So fun Kristallnacht fact right there. But
and I forget which Gauleiter it was, but the classic. This is a grim parallel. One of the defenses of Kristallnacht was that the rioters had been disciplined, and if the Nazis had wanted to exterminate all the Jewish people on Kristallnacht, they could have, but actually they didn't. So therefore, it was not a bad thing.
Yeah. Huh. Where have I heard a structurally similar argument lately?
Yeah, there's a structurally similar argument that has been used in recent times as well. But yes, I mean, the notion that what happened in Amsterdam was a pogrom, it seems, at best silly, at worst disingenuous, especially when you're actually seeing state-backed pogroms in the West Bank. Put aside Gaza, where that's a military operation. Right. But for the news that's coming out of the West Bank, it seems that the settlers in the West Bank are, have a fairly free hand in attacking Palestinians left, right, and center. So, if we want to talk about actual
and in fact, not just now, but like 2023 before October 7th had been the worst year ever, basically for that, right? That there's if you read 972 magazine, which I'd really recommend, it's a left-wing Israeli magazine that also has Palestinian writers on both sides of the Green Line. They they pointed this out, right, in the stuff they put out right after 10/7, that in fact that had become so severe that there was like an area that's like about 10% of the West Bank, that's I think basically like outskirts of Ramallah to Jericho that was almost completely emptied of Palestinian inhabitants, because again, before October 2023 had been the worst year on record for this, and it's just gotten much worse, right? Like so this does take us to Netherlands is not the place in the world where the most dramatic and alarming things are going on. So I did want to talk about a few of the places where they are. And I guess I might as well start with Palestine, but I did just want to say in response to Nuri Yank, I didn't see the earlier accusations. He says, I noticed the TIR coup accusations have been ignored. Has there been a pogrom on Jason? No, I have temporarily taken over his podcast setup because I'm having internet problems, but the legitimate government will be restored.
Is he behind you? Is he looking at you right now as you podcast? Does he have all his clothes on?
He did have all his clothes on last time I saw. I believe he's either working or watching television in his living room right now.
Fair enough.
Very generous of you to permit that.
Yeah, look, I'm not, like this is just a temporary emergency measure. As I said, the legitimate, regime will be restored, when it's over.
Mm-hmm. I believe that Egypt is still under the emergency measures from the Sadat assassination.
That sounds right.
Strictly temporary, of course.
It's like the Statute of State Security in Tsarist Russia. Like they put it on in 1881 or something and never forget to lift it right down till 1917, I think. Statute of State Security.
Yeah. So this is okay. I do want to go back to Russia before too much longer, but yeah, let's stay on Palestine for a moment, right? This is one of the things that Dr. Kuba and I talked about, I believe last time he was on the show, is that we were both doing the lib shill thing and arguing that it would in fact be bad if Trump became president again. Um, and one of the several reasons that discussed is the kind of thing that he has been saying about Palestine. And I think on the left, there's often this like kind of allergy to annoying, nuance and annoying details where people sort of say, well, it's already a genocide, so how could it get worse? It's like, well, I do agree.
It could be a successful, completed, and then sufficiently like buried and entrenched genocide.
Yeah, I mean, it could absolutely get worse. And yes, the atrocity has already rise to the level where the legal definition of genocide very much fits, but there are all sorts of ways they could escalate. And Trump has been pretty explicitly saying that. I mean, he had a Truth Social earlier today, I believe, where he said, he was talking about if the hostages aren't released, by the time he takes office, then the worst hell that's ever been unleashed ever, will be unleashed in response. And yeah, I mean, it does seem like as grisly as it is to think about. I mean, there is still a lot of room for things to get worse.
Well, shortly after the election results were sort of finalized and Kamala Harris conceded defeat, I believe it was
in a way that reminded us of that like classic Kamala charisma that makes it amazing that she didn't win.
Yeah, all I know is that with her as a resistance figure, the Trump administration will never be secure. Truly, she is that like guy who wasn't Forrest Whitaker from the Andor series of the anti-Trump.
The one who got bombed. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's. Kamala's charisma. When I saw her concession speech, I was like, this is why you had to drop out of the primary, because you're terrible. Nobody knows what you stand for beyond unbridled ambition. I couldn't tell you what her deeply felt position on anything is. Complete political chameleon, and somebody who, people talk about her being not set up for success. That's certainly the case, but at the same time, there's a reason she didn't do very well in the primary, right? It is what it is. And
yeah,
Trump
she wasn't set up well, but also, yeah, she did everything in her power to make a bad starting position worse. But Kuba, I cut you off.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that she was, no matter how she was set up, she really proceeded to commit to failure, right? Just double down on that position. But in any case, the steps are already being taken to legally annex the West Bank. That was announced, I believe, by Ben Gvir, or was it Smotrich? The one that doesn't look like Peter Griffin. And that's Smotrich.
Yeah.
Then, yes, he's been pushing for settlement in Gaza, and now he feels like there's a green light for the full and legal annexation of the West Bank. After all, Trump was the one who set the precedent by encouraging the annexation of the Golan Heights and then proceeding to be the only international figure to recognize it. So there will not be a better opportunity than this for Israel to annex the West Bank. Now everything is in motion. All of the forces within Israeli society and that are relevant internationally are empowering this kind of power play by the Israeli right. So now is the time to strike. And I think that whatever forces are left to try to impede the sort of Netanyahu Likud settler program are, they're fighting for their own survival. There's that internal case about a leaked tape, which is being used to purge the prime minister's office. Gallant, who is an indicted war criminal, right? He's right up there with Netanyahu as the number 2 genocidaire. But he also got purged from the Israeli government. So the strength of loyalists has never been greater internally. Not only that, but their international situation has gone from one of a committed, godfather, protector in the United States that has been really allowing Israel to carry out its a maximalist campaign, to an even more supportive administration in the waiting. There's nothing for Israel to fear, and no practical obstacle for them to reach, for the rightist movement to sort of reach for the national dream. The only obstacles they encounter are the practical ones of Hezbollah being a pretty reasonable field army, and the potential for some kind of economic encirclement or financial shock, something coming out of the international economic order. But even then, they're heavily insulated because of their relationship with the United States.
So on Hezbollah, my understanding is that there's a very peculiar sort of ceasefire that doesn't require all the firing to cease.
Well, it's my understanding is that this is we've all gotten used to the big picture ceasefires that herald the end of a conflict, things like the Good Friday Agreement or the ceasefires that were announced in the Balkans, right? When it is the prelude to some kind of larger settlement. But the thing that we don't remember is that a ceasefire can also be like, okay, we're not going to shoot at each other for 48 hours because right now both of us have a lot of wounded to take care of, and we've got like some practical problems to figure out before we can start killing each other again. And it's like, and it happens that the tactical level interests of both sides coincide sufficiently, so it's like, yeah, 48 hours sounds good,
And in the lead up to the ceasefire, there was a kind of reporting, for example, in Al Jazeera, which was saying like, oh, the Israelis are doing this and that and the other. Well, the thing is, in the lead up to the ceasefire, both sides are trying to like maximally damage the other side before the ceasefire kicks in. So there was a kind of it's not the kind of end of war ceasefire. It's a ceasefire where everyone's trying to get into the most advantageous position. And so, you had an intensification of Israeli attacks on civilian targets in Lebanon. You had Hezbollah continuing its operations as well. Both sides, Israel scored some major tactical victories over Hamas with its, exploding pages and, its assassination attempts. But, when they sent in ground troops to Lebanon, they were still facing a pretty well-organized military organization. Remember, Hezbollah is an insurgent organization. So compared to a regular military, they have cells, they, operate in a different way. You'll have groups and individuals who are able to, operate independently, and they were able to inflict casualties on the Israelis. So, neither side wants to back down, but at the same time, neither side really wants to continue the conflict to the same degree, as both sides have a kind of interest in perhaps scaling back some of this conflict, but there's a kind of countervailing force that they both sides want to kind of maintain as strong a position as possible as well. So, I don't know if the ceasefire is going to hold or how long it will start for. There has been numerous attempts.
Stuff, like, I mean, that's in a sense, like, that's what matters most here, right? Because, like, if to the extent that all Israel succeeds in doing is killing like a whole bunch of Hezbollah leadership figures, then, like, I mean, to be a little bit flippant about it, it seems like what you've accomplished there is just giving a bunch of Hezbollah guys really amazing promotions.
I mean, this speaks to kind of the mentality in, well, not just the Israeli military, but a lot of Western militaries. When they view when you view things through the lens of terrorism and of terrorist organizations or Oriental despots, etc., you go for the targeted assassination. But if just remember what the first act of Operation Shock and Awe was: an attempt to assassinate Saddam Hussein, believing that if you cut off the head of the snake, as it were, you'll solve the problem. But these are grassroots movements that they're not as much as the discourse as that Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, etc. These are grassroots movements with a certain degree of popular support. And inside Lebanon, there are many groups that oppose Hezbollah. But, what we've seen in recent weeks is, in face of the Israeli onslaught, even those groups who are, let's say, Hezbollah skeptical, are forced to kind of rally around the flag. So in a certain way, it's counterproductive. If the Israeli objective was to try and drive a wedge between Hezbollah and the broader Lebanese population, where fissures already exist in that mind, this operation has been completely counterproductive in that sense, because it's by attacking suburbs of Beirut, you're going to alienate large numbers of people who might not be orientated towards Hezbollah, or people who people who would say, well, for all their flaws, at least they're resisting the Israelis as well. So, from the Israeli perspective, it's been a kind of counterproductive. It hasn't stopped the missile strikes in northern Israel, so people are still displaced in northern Israel. Despite this assassination attempts. I mean, if anything, Israel has assassinated leader after leader of these movements, and every time they come back, because the social, economic, and political conditions for these anti-Israeli political movements to exist are still there. So, until there's a comprehensive peace, I don't think this current ceasefire is going to be anything more than a temporary ceasefire. And you never know what will happen. There's been numerous attempts to establish a ceasefire, on the basis, numerous attempts to establish a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, and every time those ceasefires have broken down from time to time. Israel still occupies Lebanese territories. The Israelis will say, but it's only a little bit of territory. It's only a bunch of farms. It's still Lebanese territory. So the Israelis will go, well, Hezbollah has to give up its weapons because they promised. Whereas Hezbollah said, yeah, but that's only if you withdraw from Lebanon. And you're still occupying certain Lebanese territory.
And there's a robust UN presence. The one thing that we haven't talked about at all is that because the Israeli-Lebanese conflict is under several UN resolutions, there is a peacekeeper presence. There is an international presence along the Israeli-Lebanese border, which is supposed to prevent what is taking place right now. And to their credit, the UN peacekeepers have refused to be cowed by Israeli threats and rhetoric. The UN in general has sided with the ICC and other multilateral institutions with what I consider to be an objective assessment of the security situation in Gaza and Palestine. You don't need to take sides to recognize that on a purely legal linguistic basis, acts of genocide have been carried out, and that the conflict is very one-sided at this point. And similarly, the UN force in southern Lebanon refused to evacuate and then reported on movements by Israel in breach of UN resolutions, and then attacks carried out on their own infrastructure, on their own bases, putting their own personnel in danger by the IDF. So the pretense that there's any Israeli respect for international agreements, respect for UN resolutions, right? They cite UN resolutions against Syria, against Lebanon, and some of their justifications to carry out their own actions. But you can't simultaneously hold up this international body as an arbiter of international law and be bombing their personnel that are installed in order to make sure that that international law is carried out. But yeah, it's absolutely scandalous and what's going on. And similarly, what Djene was saying, that the war has cemented and galvanized Lebanese society behind resistance and support for the people who are suffering as a result of IDF actions. And I think that one thing that this conflict is really pointing out is the extent to which the last 10, 15 years on the diplomatic front for Israel have been been substantial failures, right? Apart from the Abraham Accords, the position of Israel has gotten worse and worse in the region. And not just in the region, but among substantial segments of international society. Sure, you have the queers for Palestine and the Western left. You've always had those. But in the sort of pro-Palestinian camp, a lot of third world opinion, a lot of opinion in the global south, which doesn't have a revolutionary character, but rather sort of very respectable local national conservative character, right? Just respectability politics make the Palestinians more sympathetic and Israel more isolated. That said,
yeah.
I mean,
this is a curb on what Israel has been doing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me the main constraining force on Israel at the moment is not the United States, not criticism from Europe, not the international community, but rather their relations with the various Arab autocrats around the region. I mean, when the Abraham Accords were signed, a lot of pro-Palestinian people looked at this negatively. But my kind of atypical take was actually the Abraham Accords were a kind of positive development in a roundabout way, because these regimes had been playing a double game with Israel. They had been working with Israel under the table, but trafficking in anti-Semitism, anti-Israeli discourse as a method to legitimize themselves internally. The Abraham Accords kind of took that sort of cudgel away from the Arab states, who now were openly engaging in relations with Israel to a certain degree. It kind of took away the kind of facade that these Arab dictators care about the Palestinians. And what's the restraining force as well? These Arab autocrats, they have, they're not democracies, but they still have to attend to public opinion, right, to maintain legitimacy. So one of the constraining forces on Israel has been, they don't want to annoy Sisi too much. They don't want to annoy the Gulf monarchies too much, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the restraining force on the violence the Israelis are using, and it's a very limited restraining force, and it's coming from the fact that these Arab autocrats have to contend with a population that is just consuming this the images of the horror taking place in Gaza on a daily basis. And so they have to talk to the Israelis and say, hey, you're making it difficult for us, et cetera, et cetera. That's the constraining force that is existing on Israeli violence.
It's paradoxical, right? That the Arab autocrat to the rescue, and it can't, perversely, that will tend to legitimize and validate this paterfamilias role that especially the Gulf monarchies like to assign for themselves, right? Like, after all of you have failed with your activism and your international pressure, right, we had to step in to save the Palestinians.
Yeah, and I mean, I should say also, I mean, what Djene just laid out is kind of an accelerationist defense of the Abraham Accords, right? It's like earlier we were talking about the annexation of the West Bank, and you could even make a sort of parallel argument there that it's like.
Well, I think that's an important point, Ben. I think you're hitting on an important point, Ben, because I think there will be opposition within Israel from the kind of quote unquote liberal wing of Israeli politics who realize that annexation could lead to big problems down the road. Because once they formally, at present, the Israeli government has the benefits of annexation without the downsides of annexation. They can functionally operate on the basis that the West Bank and the Jewish population in the West Bank are citizens of Israel. They renew the law that gives them full access to the Israeli body politic every couple of years. And it puts them in a kind of sweet spot because they have that cover. I mean, if you argue with, let's say, liberal Zionists that I do, and I work with some liberal Zionists as well, Kuba knows, that they will always hide behind the fig leaf of it's a temporary military occupation.
Yeah, it's right up there with the temporary emergency measure since 1978 in Egypt.
But I mean, again, I think there's an accelerationist argument that annexation, I think, practically won't make much of a difference to what Israel is doing right now, right? Because they're functionally treating the population in a terrible way. But it will remove the liberal Zionist defense that this is a military occupation, perhaps not necessarily. I'm not I'm not teleological, as I like to say. The arc of history is long, but it bends towards genocide. So that is one potential outcome. Right. But on the other outcome, by removing that kind of the fiction of a temporary occupation, we can actually get down to brass tacks. It's the death knell of the two-state solution. I think that's why you will see, I think you'll see opposition within Israel to annexation from those who realize that perhaps this long-term will undermine the ability of the Israeli state to remain a Jewish supremacist state.
Yeah, and I mean it's already a little awkward for that line that this is just 57 years of a temporary military occupation, on the road to a two-state solution, and please ignore the 57 years of building cities full of our own citizens in this territory, which is not typically something you do if you plan to leave. But it's already awkward enough for that Netanyahu says every 5 minutes that there will never, ever, under any circumstances, be a two-state solution. And, when it's just Netanyahu doing it, you could say, okay, well, maybe he'll lose the next election, whatever. But, the Knesset a little while ago passed this resolution saying there'll never, ever be a two-state solution. And I believe the only non-Arab Knesset member who voted against it was a communist, right? Like that's it, right? Like everybody, some of the big opposition people just skipped the votes. They wouldn't have to go on record one way or the other. But everybody in the Zionist mainstream who showed up to the vote voted for it, right? So I think that already makes it a little bit tricky. But you're right. I mean, if they do go for outright annexation, I mean, this is that's easier to notice, right? You don't have to be following Israeli politics to.
I mean, there's a reason South Africa attempted to create Bantustans, right? It was an attempt to maintain white supremacy by offering a multiple state solution
Several
by
state solution,
creating black homelands, right?
But I think
and in effect, that's what the Israeli vision of that's what Israeli liberals envision as a Palestinian state, as a kind of a state that has formal sovereignty,
a reservation.
Yeah, a reservation, a Bantustan. People don't like those terminologies; they get upset by that terminology. But annexation will forestall that.
And I think that I want to highlight a possibility here, which I don't think, which needs to be set against the idea that annexation might lead to some sort of confrontation with the reality of a permanent Palestinian underclass within legally defined borders of Israel. And I think that what makes annexation attractive at this moment is not just that politically you can do it, but you can also do the next thing that's necessary, which is ethnic cleansing. Because the legal annexation by itself is meaningless, right? It's not going to get you what you want. What you want is a greater Israel. What you want is land for settlement. And what you want is not to have to worry about the status of this population. And both Smotrich and Ben Gvir have been very clear that the outcome that they would prefer for the Palestinian population is resettlement. Doesn't really matter where. They suggested the Sinai. Everyone has always suggested Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan, right? There already is a Palestinian state. It's just not on the territory of Palestine. But
which is a wonderful argument, by the way. Like,
let me give you a bit of.
If you had if we invaded Canada, and Canadians had just been deprived of citizenship for the last 57 years,
they can all go back to England.
Yeah, what are you talking about? There's already an Anglo state,
and the whole making Jordan Palestine. The Israeli nationalists will often point to the fact that the territory that comprises Jordan and Israel Palestine comprised the Palestine Mandate, but that is a very kind of dishonest reading of history. Firstly, that kind of unified territorial unit didn't exist in practice. It was briefly considered for like a year while the mandate was in the process of being created, right? So this kind of territorial unit that includes Israel, Palestine, and Jordan never really existed. And if it did exist, you could say maybe for a year. Historically speaking, the territory that comprises Jordan and the territory that comprises Israel, Palestine during the Ottoman period, they were separate administrative units. And after 1921, 1922, Palestine and Transjordan Palestine and Jordan were separate administrative units. So this notion that somehow Jordan is the Palestinian state is a very kind of is a very slanted way of looking at the kind of history of the Palestine Mandate. Because yes, Jordan was technically briefly part of the Palestine Mandate when they were in the process of actually drawing those boundaries up, and it was soon hived off as it has had a separate administrative history from what was the Ottoman provinces on the Mediterranean coast. So there's a kind of dishonesty. And secondly, just another really important point I want to raise is it comes back to the fact that the Israelis have to deal with their Arab neighbors who cooperate with them. The Israelis want to dump the Palestinians either in Egypt or in Jordan. The problem is Egypt and Jordan are their gendarmes. Like they are the ones who made peace with them. There's a reason why liberal Zionists will often say, well, you're criticizing Israel. Well, why don't you criticize Egypt for not opening its border? Well, yes, of course, Egypt's not going to open its border because they're your gendarme, but they don't want you to dump their the quote unquote excess population upon them. So, so why should Egypt be responsible for dealing with the consequences of your ethnic cleansing? And again, the other point with Jordan is the Kingdom of Jordan cooperates with Israel as well. So again, a constraining force on the Israelis is that the two prime targets to dump those populations, where you could literally, I mean, like shipping them off to, somewhere far away takes logistics, but, pushing them across the border, well, that's going to alienate your two closest Arab allies, Jordan and Egypt, so that there's nowhere for this population to go unless the West agrees to take them. But the West doesn't want to take them either. So
yeah, this is, as you say, the arc of history,
Yeah.
genocide. But I was just going to say on the first point, right? Like this is, I realize it's an uphill battle to get the rest of the world to agree with me about this, but I mean, this is why I think it's very liberating to stop caring about nationalist legitimacy and national narratives. It's like I don't, people's like, oh, there's already a Palestinian state. It's like, well, I don't give a shit whether there's a Palestinian state. It's not, my objection to the treatment of the Palestinians is not that, like, I think that it's like a divine mandate that every ethnicity in the world have a state that's attached to it, right? It's that this is a massive human rights violation, that that everybody should be a citizen of something, right? And so whether it's the like whether there were 0, 1, or 100 Palestinian states in the world, it would be a problem if the Palestinians who lived in the West Bank and Gaza were permanent non-citizen subjects of an occupying power and never made either citizens of Israel or allowed to split off and become citizens of their own thing, right? People have a right to stay where they are, and people have a right to have democratic rights where they are, right? I mean, that's what's important to me. But Kuba, real quick, and then I want to do Syria.
Well, I think that we'll end up seeing a race, and the question will be, can Israel find means of reducing the population in the West Bank at a fast enough clip, and replacing them with Israelis of the right political persuasion, that by the time you get a kind of diplomatic butcher's bill, right, the blowback starts coming in from all of the heinous stuff that you've been doing. Your position is strong enough to withstand that, right? And there's a brief amount of time that you can do maximal evil. And I think that the current Israeli government is committed to making the most of that opportunity.
Right. Well, on that grim thought, let's go to Syria, not literally because my God, but let's talk about Syria. So back, in the previous round of the Syrian civil war, the positions of Western leftists who had often done minutes at a time of internet research to determine the right answer to this question were often polarized around the question of whether the Assad dictatorship was good, actually, or anybody who happened to be fighting it was good, actually. So maybe you guys can start by clearing that question up for me. Which of those is correct? Because one of them must be.
It's all good, actually.
These are all wonderful things.
Yeah. I admire the brave resistance fighters, whatever they happen to be resisting. I'm sure they know better than I do.
Yes,
but
and also the you like Assad, you like the resistance. You're really just rooting for a good game.
Exactly. The important thing is sportsmanship, and honestly, given that this is a conflict which has seen some of the worst ISIS atrocities, I think a little bit more sportsmanship might be better for everybody. You have two sides which are almost Tintin level caricatures of an Islamic terrorist group and a repressive Arab regime, right? Assad is really, really, really bad. And you know who else is really bad? Most of the guys fighting him. Is depressingly common in cases of internal conflict. The most moderate elements and the ones which have the most potential for decent post-war were wrung out pretty quickly first. The extent to which there were Democrats in the Syrian Democratic Forces, they all got purged or fled themselves. The reality is that the rank and file is mostly the most motivated elements within the resistance, let me put it that way, tended to be ideological Islamists who had more followers than they had a practical little empire in the waiting in Syria, and that resistance, based largely on a particular type of Sunni Arab chauvinism, then got thrown against the sharpest kind of authoritarian repression you can imagine. And it looked like authoritarian repression had won it, and that after a period of increasing radicalization and fragmentation, the Sunni resistance was cornered off into this Idlib pocket where they were protected by Turkey, which has always played a very sinister role in the way that this conflict is played out. The betrayal of the Kurds being perhaps the greatest injustice, right? The clearest case of cynical crime that I can think of. It turns out they were incubating return of this kind of Sunni Arab, right, like ISIS light mobilization, and the unhappy city of Aleppo apparently has fallen. I don't know if they've reached Hama yet, but they were elements of the Sunni combatants that have been moving down towards Hama as well. And it would take us back to the worst days of the Syrian civil war, when the country was divided in two, and with enough productive economic ground and enough of a captive population for both sides to regenerate some of their destructive capability over time, like a conflict which can feed itself.
And the geopolitical situation in Syria has been deeply affected both by the war in Ukraine and also the war in Gaza. So, two of Assad's big external backers have been Hezbollah and indirectly Iran as well, or directly in certain cases, and also Russia. So there's been, but the geopolitical, by 2020, the conflict had largely been kind of frozen. But in the last 4 years, there's been radical changes to the geopolitical situation. So firstly, we have the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which of course distracted an enormous amount of Russian forces, which allowed actors in the region to kind of move about. The Russians still backed Assad, but they had fewer resources to support it. The Russians didn't intervene in Azerbaijan, Armenia as well. That was, again, another reflection. So Russia's position, which was very strong in 2020, has weakened because it has this big commitment of a war in Ukraine. And then, of course, Hezbollah has been distracted. And specifically, if we look at the decapitation strikes against leadership of Hezbollah. Hezbollah is engaged in rocket attacks on Israel. It's defending Lebanese territory against Israeli incursions. Again, you have another external actor who is distracted and not able to assist the regime. And then, of course, Iran is increasingly in a tense position. It is overextended. It has to maintain its influence in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and it's facing Israeli strikes as well. So the geopolitical situation has kind of changed, and Assad kind of sitting back and and waiting as this conflict froze. Well, the calculus has changed. Now Turkey may well be pushing to move its proxy forces, especially those in Idlib province, into a more favorable position, taking Aleppo as a big, if not so much of an economic or political blow, but certainly a psychological blow to the regime. So, I don't know how, will this conflict be, refrozen after a week or two, or, has everybody had like a 4-year timeout and are now ready to get back to full scale violence? So we're having this kind of conflict over Aleppo. And then, of course, the third force is the Syrian Democratic Forces, Rojava, the YPG. They're kind of stuck in the middle between all of this because they maintain relations with both the opposition and the Syrian government regime. So it seems like they've taken as the Syrian government withdrew, they've taken control of certain strategic areas, including Aleppo airport and the Kurdish neighborhoods of Aleppo as well. And that could, again, initiate another conflict between the opposition.
Our friend Stefan, who is in fact a YPG veteran, was talking about that in the chat, and and he was like, "Holy fuck! The YPG had an international airport. When did that happen?"
Yeah, they got. There was pictures of them going, but this is what happened initially when the Syrian government started fighting the civil war. They had close connections with the PKK and the YPG. They had been supporting them throughout the 80s and 90s. Kurds in Syria were often allowed to avoid their military service if they went and joined the PKK. And then, in the late 90s, Turkey was started getting serious and said, no, you have to stop supporting the PKK. But the Syrian regime never really sort of completely abandoned the PKK, because for them, it was a way to kind of distract the Syrian Kurdish population by directing their political activities towards Turkey. So when the civil war broke out, the Syrian government withdrew from those regions and handed them over to the YPG. And it looks like something similar is happening again when, again, as the Syrian regime tries to re-entrench itself in a more defensible territory, they're handing over districts, or at least allowing YPG to take certain districts. So, this could end up with the conflict, like I said, freezing in a couple of weeks after, the borders have moved a bit. Or we could see, in worst case scenario, an escalation of this conflict to being a kind of three-way battle between, between the Hayati Tahrir al-Sham, the kind of main opposition groups, which has consolidated itself in Idlib province. It's kind of established a kind of Muslim Brotherhood style one-party state. It's not the same as ISIS, of course, but like a very strong Islamist regime. It's backed by Turkey. It's backed by international jihadists. And, Turkey's main objective, there's no love lost between the Syrian regime and Turkey. Turkey, wants to suppress the Kurds both inside of Turkey and in Syria. Turkey had tried to make some kind of rapprochement with the Assad regime, but the Assad regime was not having it because Erdogan had been supporting the opposition. So perhaps this is a gamble to try and force the Assad regime to rein in, take repressing the Kurds more seriously as well, to get into a better negotiating position. But, I think the kind of top line story of this is that it's actually the geopolitical situation in the world and the kind of distraction of Assad's key allies that have opened up this new opportunity for the Islamist faction of the opposition to expand its role into the rubble of Aleppo.
Do you think that, to what extent do you think that this was coordinated with the Turkish government? and because it feels as though, coming as it does with the announcement of the ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel, this is a very opportune moment in terms of Israeli regional security interests for there to be a terrible crisis shaking the Assad government. And the destabilization of Syria couldn't have come at a better time. And I don't know if there's enough horizontal relations between those Sunni resistance elements in Syria and Mossad for them to coordinate timing. But maybe between Tel Aviv and Ankara, there's enough of a dialogue to trade interests.
Yeah, and I would note that, on one level, Turkey is adopting a very harsh stance on Israel, although, in practice that's less harsh, but that doesn't mean they don't cooperate. I mean, they cooperated in the Azerbaijan war. Both Turkey and Israel supported Azerbaijan. It's entirely possible that there is some kind of at least tacit agreement between them in Syria, but that's, I wouldn't say that's 100% for sure. Was this offensive by the Syrian opposition coordinated with Turkey? I mean, I find it hard to believe that Turkey, at the very least, didn't know that this offensive was going to take place. I mean, they have troops stationed there. They have their people stationed there. They are the key, border of Idlib province for supplies to get in and out. It seems to me that they must have, at the very least, known about this offensive and greenlit it. And, if you want to go further, perhaps they were the ones who encouraged the assault. We don't know who's is it the tail wagging the dog or the dog wagging the tail? We just don't know. I've read things in the Turkish press, on both sides of this argument, arguing that it's caught the government off balance, but others saying that it's part of government policy. I guess we'll find out down the road. But certainly, I don't think Turkey was taken off guard by this offensive per se. It just seems beyond. It seems to beg a belief, considering their heavy involvement with the Syrian opposition. So, who knows at this point? But it's all, one thing I would always say, though, it's always important to, when we talk about proxies, we kind of take away their agency to do things on the ground, and they will often try and, quote unquote, proxy groups will try and, create fait accomplis on the ground so that their patron has to
Yeah, the Korean War apparently was that kind of move by Kim Il-sung.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, is something we've all been talking about for years, but it's always worth saying again, is like, yeah, I mean, when you talk about proxies, I think in certain contexts that's like a useful way to talk, because it's a reminder. Like if what we're doing is we're arguing about U.S. foreign policy, right? Like that's a reminder that various wars that are going on in the world are being kept going by American funds and American diplomatic cover and all that, right? So it's like calling them proxy wars, I think, could be useful in that sense. But but if you're trying to analyze the actual dynamics of what's going on, right, then it gets a little silly. I mean, there was a while where if you were going to apply the kind of rules that a lot of people do now, that you'd say that the Haitian Revolution was like
Spanish psyop.
Yeah, exactly. That was like a proxy war for Spain, right? It's like it like clearly you haven't captured the main thing going on if you've just noticed that people on the ground are able to get weapons and support from some bigger player.
Yeah, like that's just good, best practice, right? And I think that, but that's an open question, right? When it comes to the possibilities created, the possibilities that are enjoyed by groups like, the Sunni resistance in Syria come from a weakness in the Russian security apparatus triggered by a conflict on the other side of the Black Sea, right? So it's a strategic shift that's operating on a higher level, which then can create an opening for a very local player to exert some autonomy. But the question is, will it end up being solved at that higher level of, geopolitics? Like, ultimately, is the security situation in Syria something that can be negotiated between the West and Russia in the finalization of a Ukraine deal, for instance?
Yeah. I mean, to put it another way, proxies make their own history, but they do not do so as they please.
Under circumstances their own making. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's proxies have their own interests and their own things. So like Kuba says, the Syrian opposition might be able to create some new facts on the ground, but they could have the rug pulled out from under them if there's a kind of top level agreement. It's not that great powers are not willing to sell out their
Syrian Kurds.
Yeah, ask the Syrian Kurds, exactly.
Yeah, right. Totally. Keep thinking about that. You and Michael Brooks wrote an article about that when that happened. Yeah. Okay, so I do want to move on to Russia, Ukraine in just a minute. But I just, on this, just putting a bow on the horrors in Syria, like, obviously, right, Bashar al-Assad is an incredibly awful, mass murderous dictators, committed really unspeakable war crimes, etc. But it's I do want to just linger for a second on the character of the Sunni resistance forces, that just took over Aleppo. Because you kind of said, okay, well, it's not ISIS, which is like, if that's the standard, right? Then it's like, not as bad as ISIS, right? It's
but I mean, yeah, it's ISIS light, but it's still got that ISIS flavor, that unmistakable ISIS tang.
Yeah, because look, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know what I see kind of filter into Western, social media and reports, but it's like, I mean, I think if you're a member of a religious minority, I mean, this is fucking terrifying.
Oh yeah. It's like, imagine the high school skinheads that really, really mean it, and they formed a gang that is now internationally recognized as a territorial government, and they're going to swoop into your town. Well, like, not everybody might have a problem with that, but there are a lot of innocent people who definitely will. And yeah, like, it is not going to be good for a lot of people. And the Alawites, right, for all the terribleness of the Assad regime, because they're a religious minority on certain ethno-religious grounds, the government has enforced a principle of coexistence. And turns out that's not something that's not table stakes, right? That's not something you can take for granted. That alone might be a determining matter for a lot of people, especially if for them that whole religious minority thing isn't an abstraction.
Right. Yeah. All right. So when we were introducing all this, we were talking about Russia, and that's come up several times in the Syria conversation because the causal connection. But this is seems like Biden is determined to make the last couple months of his presidency memorable, and not just by pardoning his son.
Hunter did nothing wrong.
I do have an actual view on this, which is that I'd actually be all in favor of just, having a generally more forgiving criminal justice system for people who've done a lot of similar things. And, if we're going to like maybe pardon tens of thousands of people in federal prisons, that, Hunter could be somewhere on the list, and I wouldn't object to it at all.
Call it Hunter Biden Day and make it a categorical type, crackhead son, get out of jail free situation.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the fact that I think the use of the presidential pardon power for just blatant, nepotism that I'll get my boy out of trouble is not great. And I also think that, I don't know. In the article I wrote for Jacobin back when the charges were first came down, against Hunter, exactly. Hunter Biden's corruption is a symptom of grotesque inequality. And, what I said in here is it's like, what's really striking to me about this is that, Hunter's entire career is only possible given just astonishing levels of economic inequality because, and this is actually even more true if you accept the official defense that it's like, well, Joe Biden never listened to him, and so there was never any corruption on that level. Because then it's like, okay, well, what are we really talking about here, right? We're talking about a situation in which, you have a society that's so unequal that you have
Hunter Biden can smoke some crack and impregnate some women.
Yeah, well, and also that after he's done all those things, right? I mean, then he can still get all these bizarre sinecures, domestically and internationally, which seem like it's like, look, I mean, this is something you'll only get in a society that's so unequal that plutocrats can basically spray gold coins in any direction where they think that, a few of them might land on someone who might have the ear of somebody powerful. That, I mean, I think I think he went straight from rehab to,
Burisma.
Burisma, right? Because
that's why I think to heal this nation, we need a Hunter Biden, Lauren Boebert presidency. Reach across the aisle, I would defend that.
Yeah. I think that for either vice president or first lady, right? That's
either would work.
Either, exactly. So I kind of ended the article by saying I don't know if it's possible that if he were born into a more equal world, Hunter Biden still would have fucked up his life in a lot of the same ways that there are people who just end up having messy and chaotic lives. But I am pretty sure if you're born into a more equal world, he would have had to get a job.
But or maybe nobody gets jobs in that more perfect world.
Well, sure. Ideally, nobody, but yes, that we just have fully automated luxury communism, and Hunter can pursue whatever luxury he can find, there. But yes, assuming that we haven't progressed to that far, he would have to get a job. But in any case, Burisma brings us right back here to Russia, Ukraine, and it is pretty astonishing, I've got to say. I mean, the trajectory over the course of, we're getting close to 3 years of the Ukraine war is that every time Biden says that he's not going to do something, right? That it's like, oh, here's a weapon system that you can't have because that'll be too escalatory, or you can have it, but you can't use it in this way because that would be too escalatory. Then you just kind of have to set the stopwatch and see how long it takes for that line to be crossed, right? And most recently, U.S. missiles can be used to strike in Russia, not just right at the border, and that's
I think this is the same thing that's happening with Hezbollah and Israel, though. I think everybody's calculating that there'll be a ceasefire as soon as Trump gets into office. So the United States is allowing Ukraine to use offensive weapons because I think the hope is they'll be in a more favorable negotiating position. That would be my guess. Kuba knows the mind of the Washington, D.C. foreign policy apparatchik better than I do. But, my
when that sentence started, I thought it was going to end in an incredibly racist place that Kuba knows the mind of the Slav,
The mind of the Slav, yeah.
Much of it is.
But I think with the Democratic, this war is the Democratic Party's war, right? It has come to be seen as the Democratic Party's war, just as Bush's war. Even though Obama continued those wars, they were Bush's wars. Even though Trump, continued to arm Ukraine, and I'm sure he's not going to turn off the spigot of weapons overnight, but he will inherit the Democratic Party's war. And I think there's a realization of this. And I think Democrats and I think some neocon Republicans on the download are probably saying, okay, they've got a month and a bit before Trump is inaugurated, then all bets are off. So let's go to the wire, because I think there's a sense that there's a ceasefire coming. That's why, this war, I had a friend who goes to Ukraine and does aid every so often. He says, he's a big neocon. He's a big give the Ukrainians all the weapons they need. But he's like, yeah, this war's over. It's over. It's done. We're just waiting out the clock, right? And so the question is, how unfavorable will Ukraine's position be in any future negotiation with Russia? Because there's a kind of paradox here. The longer the war drags on, in certain ways, that's going to put Ukraine in a less favorable position. But perhaps if they can do a real big burst of energy and take something back or expand that offensive into Kursk or whatever, that they'll have some chips at the table. So I think this is a kind of Hail Mary, as you say here, or a desperation move. I think, they've been ramping this up for a while. And, as far as, the Biden administration has had lines, and those lines have moved. And I think we're in the kind of end game, because who knows what Trump's going to do. I was asked to write an article for Derek Davidson's newsletter about Turkey-U.S. relations under Trump. And I'm like, it's anyone's guess. Who even knows, right? Will there be corruption and authoritarian solidarity between the two? Or will the Christian nationalists want to launch a new jihad against Turkey? Who freaking knows, right? Who knows what's going to happen? They're appointing Rubio as the Secretary of State. He's not he's one of those guys who's been Russia bad, right? At least historically. Now I think he's now more orientated towards ending the war. But also, who knows where it's going to go? Who knows?
I think with Rubio as Secretary of State, the best hope for peace elsewhere in the world is that we want to avoid distractions, for when we send the Marines to Caracas.
Exactly.
And also with JD Vance and that particular NatCon set of conservatives, the big show is always China. That's where you're going to have a grand superpower confrontation, and everything else is distraction. And from a domestic kind of Kulturkampf position, right? The JD Vance, the MAGA set is actually kind of Putin curious. So I think that to a certain extent, I think that you could psychoanalyze the missile strikes into Russia as a fit of rage associated with Biden's own geriatric impotence, right? Especially after these election results. I think that it's tactically and strategically very ill-advised, because whatever advantage that you can get out of using these missiles, it's not going to substantively change the strategic balance in Ukraine. Like, what can you do? Maybe you decapitate the some crucial cadre, right? Like, you eliminate the logistics integration for an entire Ukrainian front, right? So an advance which is supposed to happen in April has to be postponed until May, right? Something along those lines. You're not going to break open a new front and allow Ukrainians to capture some offsetting set of territory, right? They got a little nibble at Kursk, but compared to what Russia has in Ukraine, it's absolutely trivial, and it's an annoyance more than anything.
And I think this speaks to something that Kuba often talks about in terms of the mentality of a lot of American foreign policy apparatchiks. There's this notion that America has the power to remake the world as it wishes, and the Ukraine war is coming up against the limits of America's ability to remake the world as it wants to. America can't go in fully to support the Ukrainian government against Russia because of nuclear weapons, so they're kind of relegated to providing arms and technical support and aid and things like that. But that's not going to cut it against Russia, which just has an enormous advantage in terms of manpower, in terms of, military weaponry, all these factors. So, I think there's a lot of people out there, and I think a lot of liberals as well, like what they used to call like muscular liberals or whatever, who are having a hard time accepting that actually America's the golden kiss from America is not going to save Ukraine. Actually, they put everything they could on the table, and it wasn't enough. Yes, it probably stopped the Ukrainians getting completely rolled over in the first couple of weeks of the war, but warfare is about, in the modern era, is about logistics, right? It's about logistics and manpower, right? Everyone always goes on about how great the Confederate generals all were during the American Civil War. That's fucking great for the Confederate generals, who will just get absolutely pwned by like a bunch of like green Irish people shipped off the boat straight into Union things. But guess what? They have like repeater rifles and an endless freaking supply of dudes to back them up. So Russia just has that like logistical things. Ramping up technological support and weapons to Ukraine doesn't help overnight. It's not like you can give them advanced weaponry and then all of a sudden they know how to freaking use it. There's a reason at the beginning of the war, the Ukrainians were wanting to have like older aircraft models, and even Russian-made aircraft models, because those are the ones that pilots know how to fly. And I'm assuming, and Kuba will probably know better than me, a lot of modern military technology is extremely complicated, and you're going to need at least like 6 months taking the courses and learning how to use it properly.
Well, that's the thing. And this is one reason why the missile strikes, I don't know how to pronounce the acronym. Is it ATACMS? Whatever they are. There's two, every NATO country has their own particular version. The Storm Shadow is the British one. But these systems, it's not just an escalation that NATO is supplying weapons which Ukraine can then use against the Russian homeland, but these weapons require to be operated, to target, to do what they're supposed to do. They require support infrastructure, which Ukraine does not independently possess, right? Tapping into things like satellite positioning, different guidance systems. I don't even know what other kinds of infrastructure might be necessary, as well as the training on how to use the systems, how to make sure that all the calibration is correct. You have to imagine that these are insanely complicated types of technology. So NATO personnel are involved. They have to be. They're providing intelligence. They're operating machinery. These are not going to be Ukrainians. These are going to be NATO personnel that are engaged in acts of warfare against Russia. And so the footprint here in terms of NATO involvement, right? My anxiety is that this is an attempt to perhaps bait Russia or create some sort of more durable entanglement, which will make easy wind down of the war impossible.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess there is a question there, though, right? Like, so, I mean, if it does just kind of drag on, you know, forever, like, I mean, I get what, you know, I mean, I get from like a, you know, now like Ukrainian nationalist, you know, maximalist posture, like what you know, what the hope is there, and you know, and I mean, to be clear, right, this, you know, like it's not like it's illegitimate. They got invaded, right? They have it's the most understandable thing in the world, right? You know, you want to take back, you know, the stuff that you lost, but it also seems like, you know, just doing another year, another 2 years, another 3 years, you know, even if that were on the table right now, you know, it just seems fantastically unlikely, you know, to get all that back, right? And it's also just very unclear to me, right? Like what the you know, like from a Russian maximalist perspective, I mean, it's like, you know, what are they going to, like, you know, it's already, you know, it seems hard to see what they've really gotten out of this, right? That they, and, you know, it's, I mean, you've had 2, you know, almost 3 years of being at war. You did take, I mean, I know they got sort of by a lot of it, right? But I mean, they did take some very big economic hits, you know, at the beginning. And they, you know, they've gotten, obviously lost, you know, tons of people, and obviously gotten lots more international isolation from it. I mean, it's like, what would the Russians really have to stand to gain at this point, you know, from dragging this out further?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like, I don't know if, have you guys ever seen Fist of the North Star?
No.
Well, in Fist of the North Star, the Fist of the North Star guy, he like punches people.
Mr. North.
Huh?
Mr. North.
Mr. North, he punches people, and then they go, "Ha ha, you punched me, I'm fine." And then 3 minutes later, he goes like, "Yeah, you're already dead." And they stand around, laugh at him, and then their heads explode because he's done all like the ninja moves on them. And they're dead. They just don't know it yet. That's kind of how I feel like the Ukraine war is. It's like, it's over, right? You know, like, Russia didn't win the total victory it wanted, but, you know, gradually now in this war of attrition, Ukraine is like getting pushed back further and further, losing territory further and further. And so, you know, what's the point of dragging the war on at the moment? It's pretty grim because it seems like it's over. And again, that's what my friend who just came back from Ukraine said. He goes, yeah, they can't get men. The situation is pretty dire. Morale is really low. And, you know, it feels like it's over. And, you know, the Ukrainians were, you know, not happy about the Trump victory. So, you know, the you know, at this point, the swifter this conflict comes to an end and the killing stops, at the very least, that we move to, and I suspect, and maybe Kuba, you'll disagree, I suspect we probably won't get a full peace treaty or anything like that, but we'll just have this conflict frozen again. It'll be one of these frozen conflicts, and you'll have a giant Transnistria in the east of Ukraine, which is kind of functionally part of Russia and has this kind of weird limbo situation where the Ukrainians have not given up that territory, but there is no active attempt to retake it. So who you know, who even knows?
The issue with making it a frozen conflict is that if you don't have some mechanism to ensure the neutralization of whatever rump Ukraine persists, then it becomes a situation not that different from the Hezbollah ceasefire, right? Like, what'll happen is that survivor state is going to lick its wounds. It's going to whoever the head of state is just going to be touring around all of the NATO capitals looking for reconstruction and security support. And he'll get it. If there's no mechanism to prevent it, then, well, the war has showed that Russia is a threat to Europe and that Ukraine is a frontline state. So time to shore up our front line while we can. And it would be uncertain how long the period of refurbishment and preparation would take. Like, maybe you would have to grow another generation of Ukrainian boys. Grim, right? But like, maybe you don't, because the refugees that come back will come back to a smaller Ukraine. There will be places that they can't resettle. Maybe that'll fill your new model army. But without some mechanism for neutralizing Ukraine, then you can't. All you have is a tactical piece. You don't have Russia's core interests, core security interests recognized. And instead of tolerating that as a frozen conflict, the Russians could just keep going, right? Force a break in the lines, or lately what they've been doing is the so-called electric campaign, or the electric war. Try to knock out the heating infrastructure and, you know, what Ukrainians rely on to just get through the winter, in order to force capitulation that way. Now, so it's a question, like, what is Russia going to tolerate? And one problem is that a maximalist Russian victory, something which includes administration over Western Ukraine, is going to create a Northern Ireland situation. And even if it gets that far, because also it's going to attract a reaction from other NATO countries.
Yeah, it seems like the absolute best case scenario for them, if they somehow managed to overrun the entire country, would be that they just had this like horrible bloody war of counterinsurgency forever. Yeah.
The problem is, how do you, in some ways, like a frozen conflict wouldn't be that bad an outcome, but that equilibrium is not stable, right? You freeze the conflict, that just means that it'll be unfrozen at some future point. And I still think that the way that you get out of this, it's not just a single war, it's a period of instability, right? We've also talked about Syria as being partly a development on the Russian front, right? That the underlying security problems and questions in this period of conflict will need a great power conference to resolve. And I don't know if we're ready for that yet.
Well, I do just want to say, while we're talking about this, that you know, all of these, you know, I mean, assuming that you know there isn't some sort of either freezing or actual diplomatic resolution to the conflict, and Putin's heart doesn't grow 3 extra sizes like the Grinch, and he just decides to turn away from militarism, so that neither of those things happen. Then of course they do need to, you say they have this great manpower advantage, but you got to keep drawing in more manpower, and that's my excuse for showing the strangest thing that I've seen in a long time, which is this Russian military recruitment ad. So let's see. So this is the here we go.
Сделаны наши мужчины. Из чего же наши мужчины? Из татушек и проколотых ушек.
The rhyme is pretty good in Russian.
И банановых смузи. Сделаны наши мужчины. Из яркого грима и стримов. Из сладких пирожных и брендов одежных. Сделаны наши мужчины. Из чего сделан ты? Присоединяйся к тем, кто сделан из чести, доблести и мужества. Присоединяйся к своим.
I can totally see a younger Kuba doing the thing in his underpants with the with the pie on his nuts.
Yeah, I mean, look, it does. We spend a lot of time in the show thinking about arguments and premises and conclusions and all that. So, I think in this case, the basic case being made is pretty simple. It's like, oh, you haven't joined the Russian army. What are you, gay? So powerful argument. You should definitely sign up to like die in the cold somewhere in
a cold, pointless war where everybody's losing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the guys that you're shooting at aren't even satisfyingly racially different, right?
Can't even really get that.
Yeah, the racially different guys who you want to shoot at are on your side.
Yeah.
You got Ramazan Kadyrov, the MMA fighters. It's like, can we shoot that? No. Yeah, this Chechen feudal vassal and his MMA fighter army.
But credit where credit's due. There's something about the phrase illusions and banana smoothies is like stuck in my head for the months since I first watched that ad. Just amazing.
Yeah, I mean, that presumably the guy who put it together is just the Russian Don Draper, right? Like, we need our finest Madison Avenue style gentlemen on this ad campaign. It is not just pro-army, it is also anti-gay.
Exactly.
2 birds with 1 stone.
So last thing I did want to touch on is we've been talking about various like degenerating oligarchies and failed states around the world, and the tour wouldn't be complete without talking about the United States of America, which if you're going to do the sort of conventional joke about where you like how America would be described in the international news if it was not America, right? That deposed strongman Donald Trump is returning to power, vowing vengeance against his political enemies. And we talked about this a little bit. Lost Gene. We talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the show, but I wanted to give circle back to it while you were with us on the stream, because it is really striking to me, right? You think back to that article that you and I wrote in a couple months ago, right? The Trump wants to Jake, if we could grab that again. Trump wants to
purge the deep state in order to weaponize it.
Yeah, exactly. I was saying at the beginning of the show, I mean, this was like a little bit speculative when it was written, but I mean, now it's just like, these guys keep giving interviews where they just kind of say that.
Yeah. I feel very gratified. I mean, obviously, it's horrible for the world and many people that I care about, but I told you so. So, there's that. And we'll see what it's like, right? I never expected to have a front row seat at a series of great purges, but like, as any student of Marxism must, right, like, come to terms with, this is something that we know happens, and the consequences are going to be extraordinarily grave, one way or the other, right? Is it possible that the deep state sort of reasserts itself or prevents Trump from carrying out like his plans? Are there going to be enough collective generals supporting each other and defying orders to persist the command structure as it exists? Or are we going to get a new security apparatus which is willing to do whatever Donald Trump says?
Yeah. And I mean, you're putting together some of the things that, that he's been saying. I mean, it is just the first announcement that he made, about personnel, more or less, was Matt Gaetz as AG, which was given up on so quickly that maybe that was just
could have been a trial balloon.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But it does seem like maybe a pretty suggestive one that
definitely sent a message, right?
Yeah, I mean, I saw, I saw this tweet. Jesse Single, I think, was tweeted this, said now that the obvious best candidate has withdrawn for some reason, got to think about who the alternatives are. That could be Attorney General, perhaps, the previously unknown Trump cousin in Estonia who gives free walking tours, or I don't remember what the second jokey one was, but then the third was the pile of AK-47s with the word revenge spray painted on them. I mean, that is like, I mean, Kash Patel. I mean, like, this is, there are a lot of indications, and there's the fact that, like, Trump keeps saying this stuff, right? I mean, like, he was saying it during the election that, that he wants to, he wants to take away like broadcast licenses from media companies. He wants to do some kind of purge of presumably public university faculty that or at the very, very least foreign students, right? That his deport pro Hamas radicals line in the GOP platform and make campuses safe and patriotic again. There are a few ways of interpreting that, but like the general, like, it would be safe to say that anything that he can do to promote academic purges, he would do, at least if you read him as being serious about that, right? And certainly this deep state stuff, I mean, this is kind of what I was saying earlier, but I mean, it's just like, the point we were making in the article that I think is worth just kind of circling and underlining again is it's not like the Trump position is like, let's abolish the CIA or, let's abolish the FBI or anything, right? They like these things, right? They just want to get rid of the bad people. And to a certain extent, the party line is, it's just, they want to get rid of the bad people because they're like, they're like, they've persecuted good patriots, in the past. But I mean, like, they do keep saying things to suggest that's like part of why they want to get rid of all the bad people is so they can put in loyalists, and then the real persecution can start.
Yeah, I think that there's the segment of conservative opinion that feels like there's been all of this overreach on things like censorship and the politicization of government lawsuits, right? The DOJ spying on the wrong people, this kind of thing. And it matters a great deal whether the issue is the FBI shouldn't be doing this or the FBI shouldn't be doing this to my people. And it's, you can, I feel like the reel of times that you hear the pro forma, oh, they shouldn't be doing this to anybody, right? First Amendment rights, et cetera, like that has never been particularly dominant, and it has decreased over time. And versus the we're going to show them, and they're going to feel what it's like when the shoe's on the other foot. That has increased in both the violence of the rhetoric and the frequency of utterance. So it's hard to see how you get anything good out of this, right? Like, you're just going to get, sure, like some of the people running the repressive apparatus may lose their jobs, but it won't be for the reasons that you want them to. And they'll be replaced by people who are going to do the same stuff, except with, red hat.
Yeah. I mean, think about, the analogy that might be useful here is, Yoav Gallant, being fired, but not for being a war criminal. Yeah, I mean, I think there's something I've been pushing for years is that the American left really needs to learn a second historical analogy. That not everything is Hitler. Most things are not Hitler, but there are also a lot of not quite Hitler, but very bad things. These are some high level insights at the end of the show, people, that there's bad stuff that's not Hitler, but very bad in some cases. I actually remember I was talking like a year ago, with a friend of me, a show, Sohrab Ahmari, and I brought up the article that Djene had written with Michael Brooks, where he called the GOP America's AKP, as like a something I liked because it was teaching people a second metaphor. And Sohrab laughed, and then he thought about it. He's like, okay, but like the AKP actually did deliver, like material. So it's a little bit of an unfair comparison. But look, I mean, I think if you look around the world right now, I mean, you see there are lots of ways that you can have, like, again, you're not, there are lots of ways you can be well short of, crystal knocks happening, but you can still, but you can still have democratic institutions more or less in place, right? But I mean, authoritarianism comes in a spectrum. We could absolutely get way worse on that spectrum.
Yeah, there's a whole range of pre-wartime repression that I don't think we've sampled yet. I anticipate that things will reach that point in the dystopian evolution where it's obvious that something is happening and it isn't good. For everybody will be able to pick up on that, but it won't look like easy to reference TV show yet.
Right. Well, fair enough. We'll have to have you back on for the next season of the show to break down all of the fun new characters. We're gonna have by that point, and the unexpected plot twists. In the second.
This season, it's a whole bunch of blonde Fox News people.
Yeah, there are a bunch of new characters, but that's like they're all typecast from that. That seems right. Yep. So yeah, I have if you so yeah, fun times for everybody. Those of us who are college professors with no job protections who've written tons of pro-Palestinian things and sometimes live in a country that Trump has repeatedly talked about sending troops to, are particularly looking forward to it. But there are things for everybody to look forward to in the brave new world. So we will, of course, have to have you back on to talk about it when all that happens. We are not going to do a post game tonight. Sorry, guys, but so that's going to be that. But thank you for your time as always, comrade. Left is best.